Hi, everyone. Welcome to Click Talk. In our previous videos, we were talking about mergers and acquisitions, and we found that it was a little bit vague. We were talking at a high level about like general principles, general best practices, and we both thought let's do a case study of one of the mergers and acquisitions where we were actually involved so we could talk through some of the principles that we discussed. Just to kind of set the framework of this merger, Baiju, why don't you tell us a little bit about the case we're going to look at in particular?
Yeah, so we were brought in, one of the individuals at this organization, Sunbelt Solomon. He had worked for one of our other customers, Home Franchise Concepts, and he was a CIO at Sunbelt Solomon. And he asked us to help them integrate this new company they had purchased into their 365 ecosystem. So right now they have Sunbelt Solomon, and then they have this other new acquired company, which is named Magna.
Oh, okay. And in other videos, we've talked about like AEC, the various industry that we have a very broad approach. What industry is Sunbelt Solomon in?
I put them in the manufacturing industry. They remanufacture transformers, which I'm not exactly sure what that means, but these are the big transformers you see it up on the poles or at power plants. But that is their main business. The company they acquired does a lot of electrical service work. So the goal of the merger was to bring manufacturing and service to be all under one roof.
Okay. And so our contact brought us in, and the initial request was like, hey, can you set up, it wasn't like necessarily to merge the companies together. What was the initial request?
So initially and it was a little bit vague. Initially, it was kind of like, we need to be able to communicate with the other company better. So what we did is we did a B2B connection where you link the two tenants together. So you're in the smaller company, I'm in the larger company. When I send you a Teams message, it doesn't say external. There were some resources like SharePoint and things like that users from the acquired company needed to access. So it was really to facilitate some better cross-company communication.
Yeah, and we talked about that in the videos, that that's kind of an initial step, and that seems sort of light, but it actually ends up being pretty important to facilitate, again, the communication. You're talking about tenants, you're talking about M365.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
And this B2B, business to business, is that a third-party solution, or is that something that Microsoft offers?
It's built into the 365 ecosystem, so it's a matter of just configuring it, but there are some challenges because you got to add people to groups. It takes some work to get it working how you want it.
Okay, so we are brought in. We set up the B2B connection between Sunbelt Solomon and what's the other company?
Magna.
And just for the sense of like scope and user size, what are the user sizes of each of these entities?
So Sunbelt was about 1,200 users. Magna was about 400.
Okay, we're brought in to set up the B2B. That typically is the first step. And maybe they were hoping that would solve the issue and they were good to go. What problems did they face when they're like, oh, we need more than a B2B connection?
Yeah, even, with Teams channels and Teams group, they'd be switching from Sunbelt to Magna and vice versa if they wanted to Teams people. And then for, giving permissions in SharePoint wasn't that straightforward. The organization chart, they had challenges there because they're in two different tenants. So even though it was better than it still wasn't like one company.
I see. Oh, and then in Teams, was it that sort of clunky where you had to switch accounts?
Yes.
Okay. If you guys have seen this before, it's not very elegant if you have more than one account in Teams. You have to kind of click by your name, click the drop down, switch over to the account, do your thing, switch back. I said, okay. So then they go through this period after the B2B and they're like, this is not exactly right. What happens next?
Well, so we are in a lot of discussions with them on how best to move Magna into the Sunbelt tenant. The challenge that we discovered when we did our initial B2B setup, because we had to really do some thorough kind of analysis and investigation of both tenants when we did the integration, was that Magna was really invested in the 365 platform. So they were using everything. They were using, obviously email, Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint, Defender, Intune, and Calling. We knew this was going to be a really challenging migration because, and the thing was, most of their users were remote. They weren't in an office. They were out in an oil field or, somewhere where it's not like very easy to coordinate getting on their computer.
Okay. You do your due diligence. You discover that Magna has a more mature M365 environment than Sunbelt does. Magna, remember, has 300 users. Sunbelt has 1,200 users. In a different situation of a merger and acquisition, if you came in with a very compact timeline, what would your gut sense be about the two tenants?
We wanted to get Magna into Sunbelt. Sunbelt was the acquiring company. So that's kind of the typical strategy we use. But this one, once we realized what they had, we knew it was going to be a very difficult project.
Short timeline, you would typically merge the smaller company into the larger company. But after you did your due diligence, you decided what was the better course of action?
So after, and this was a lot of discussion, a lot of kind of hand-wringing on both our part as well as the company's part, we proposed to them moving Sunbelt into Magna's tenant.
Yeah, so that is really kind of an out-of-the-box solution.
Yes.
It's not what you would think. And I just want to highlight the timeline point that given enough time, being brought in early enough really facilitated a thorough due diligence process where then you could make this. It's a disruptive suggestion.
It is, yes.
It's a very disruptive suggestion. So that's just hearkening back to our earlier points about if you're in this process, bring IT in early, because there's things you just cannot plan on and think about. In your thinking, you would think, merge Magna into Sunbelt. It didn't turn out that way at all. Okay. So you guys do the hand-wringing.
Right, yes.
Because it is disruptive.
Very disruptive.
We would prefer it be the opposite. Magna just gets merged into Sunbelt. But the truth of the matter is it had to be reverse, right?
Correct.
This brings me to, the question of governance. What was your experience kind of pitching this idea to the Sunbelt folks? And was there clear governance in kind of getting that?
The two people we worked at both Sunbelt and Magna, obviously they're the same company now, we're very open to our suggestions. We had one kind of head of IT at Sunbelt, and then we had a head of IT at Magna. Thankfully, all of us, got along very well. But it was definitely kind of a culture shock for Magna because at Sunbelt, they had a pretty large IT department, maybe 10 people or something like, whereas at Magna, it was just one guy that kind of did everything. So even in terms of giving admin accounts into the Magna tenant, like a lot of that had to be, done. So that way they could properly support the users.
Yeah, and without that clear governance, this sort of out-of-the-box solution that was necessary, we had to do this.
Right.
It would be difficult to implement without someone at Sunbelt looking at the due diligence and saying, yeah, we're going forward with this. This is the plan, right? Mm-hmm. That's like concrete information about how bringing IT in early in the timeline helps, and also about how clear governance can help, not even help, can facilitate decision making. This is something we have experience in. Mm-hmm. If you're early in the stage of a merger and acquisition, we encourage you to reach out. If you're late in the stage of a merger and acquisition and you haven't considered IT, we also encourage you to reach out. This is Click Talk, and stay tuned for the next video where we take the ideas and we put them into real life and see what happens when we merge the larger tenant into the smaller tenant.